We've all been there. Buying a pattern, checking your size against the measurements, picking your size in the pattern, making the pattern, and then realizing that it really doesn't quite fit you. That's where fitting comes in. For this tutorial, I have put together the Simplicity Amazing Fit pattern. This is actually a pattern that I used to use a lot as a basic bodice pattern. But after making it multiple times in the pattern size that it says that my bust is, and realizing that it doesn't fit me particularly well, I did eventually move to making my own basic block, which if you are interested in doing, you can check out my video on how to draft your own pattern. But regardless of whether or not you're using a commercial pattern, one you've drafted yourself, or something else entirely, I always recommend, if you can, make a mock-up and then fit that mock-up. You'll save yourself some headache and potentially reduce your likelihood of wasting a lot of money and fabric and materials and time, and it's fine. For a commercial pattern, if you have multiple sizes available, when picking the size, if, like me, your sizes do not tend to match up to what their sizes say on the back, don't worry, very normal. You want to find whatever the biggest measurement is. So in my case, the bust is always my biggest measurement. My bust is 36 inches, but my waist is slightly smaller than the waist that they have on here. So I'm going to cut out the larger size, the 14, and I'm going to know that the waist is going to be too big. Now, if you might have the opposite, your waist might be bigger, you'll want to cut out the size that matches your largest measurement. When you're fitting a mock-up, the first thing you want to do is make your mock-up. Now, I recommend making this out of a material that is similar, although not necessarily the same, as the one you're going to make your final garment out of. Mostly, if you're making your garment out of a stretch material, then you want to pick the appropriate 4-way or 2-way stretch, and if you're making it out of a non-stretch material, then typically you're going to make it out of a muslin sort of fabric. You're going to want to put your mock-up on your dress form inside out, so you want the seam lines on the outside. This will help you a lot because when we start with fitting, we always start in the existing seam lines. And if you don't have a dress form, you can do this on yourself. Depending on what you're fitting, you might want to acquire a buddy because it can be a little tricky to do the back on your own, but with some creative use of mirrors and a little bit of flexibility, maybe some yoga, you can do it. I've done it a lot. As you can see, once we get it on the dress form, there's clearly too much space in here. This is not a nice fitted bodice. This is a little bit more potato sack-like than I would like. So let's start by fitting it. I can obviously see that every seam can get taken in. I typically start with my side seams as the first ones to take in because taking in a side seam has less of an impact. I'm not moving darts, I'm not really moving curved seams, so I just find them a little bit easier to take in. Now, I don't want to pull it all the way in tight because you'll see here, we start getting these little pucker lines. I'll start getting distortion on the bodice and a little bit on the back as well. And right around here, if I pull it just all the way in only on the side seam. So we want to distribute the reduction of volume across the bodice as much as possible. So I'm gonna just kind of tuck in here. I think like that seems good. Now I'm doing this on a dress form, so I can use this sideline as a bit of a guide for how to make sure I get a nice even tuck on this side seam. One of my recommendations, if you're fitting it on yourself and not on a dress form, you might want to wear a shirt that has like prominent side seams that you can feel, so you've got some nice guidelines to help you. So we just pin the seams in place. We're gonna do it on both sides. At this point, don't worry too much about taking in the exact amount on either side, because when we finish fitting our mock-up, that's when we actually check for symmetry. We'll get to that a little bit later. So taking the side seams in, that helps. That's a good help here. Now, that actually helps a fair amount with my bust measurement. But I still have a little bit excess here in my waist and my underbust. So let's do the same thing. We're gonna do a little pinch. For this, we're gonna pinch both at the same time to try and help make sure that I'm doing it evenly. And as you pinch, just make sure as much as possible you wanna keep these pieces nice and smooth, especially between here and here, so that you're not gonna get weird bunching or puckering as you adjust your seams. Feeling pretty good about the bust. We've got a little bit of extra room still. I check up here. I don't think I need to take in any more further on these seams. It's sitting pretty snug to the dress form. So let's take a look at the back. Now the back just has too much extra space, and I could like pull it all in here at the center seam, or I could even take in these side seams a little bit more, but then I'm gonna start getting this side seam like off the actual side seam because I'm trying to take in too much material. So this is where I'm going to add a dart. So I'm actually going to sort of find a rough middle point, and I'm going to make a pinch. I'm going to make a pinch here where I just pull the fabric. I'm like, this is my XX fabric, a lot like I had on my seam line, and then I'm just gonna pin it. And again, if you have a dress form, you can kind of use this guideline. There's some seams on the dress form that you can use. You don't have one? Cool, this is cool too. Just like taking in the seams, we pin our dart until I don't really feel like I've got extra material. And that's really all a dart is. It's a pinch in the fabric. Same here. Pull it. I'm lining it up with this seam here on the dress form, but it's about the middle of the back piece. Just sort of pinch it till this sits nice and flat and this sits nice and flat. The other reason for adding a dart and not taking it out of the center back seam is the center back seam, you're often going to be adding in a zipper or a closure. It's a lot easier to do that if those lines are still straight, which they won't be once you take material out of them. They'll start getting wonky and curved, which will make zippers, which are already a nightmare, even harder. And then we try and just sort of match it up as evenly with the top of this dart over here. And now with those darts in there, all that material taken out, the back is a lot snugger. Now before you start sewing, I actually recommend take a Sharpie or some sort of marker and note down where these new seam lines are. You'll notice I'm only drawing lines on half the bodice because, and I mentioned this earlier, we want our pieces to be symmetric. Unless, the exception to this is if your body is significantly asymmetrical, then adjust and fit according to your body's needs. But typically speaking, we want a pattern to be the same on either side, unless also it's an asymmetrical pattern, but typically speaking, we want them to be the same on both sides so that we don't get weird bunching or pulling or twisting. So what we're going to do is we're going to transfer, which is why I drew these lines on here because it makes it a lot easier to see, these seam lines onto the other side to make them symmetric. To transfer the lines, I'm going to line up the seams at the very edge. Then I'm going to fold over at that new line. And I'm just going to draw the line. Now bear in mind, don't use a Sharpie if this is your final material. Use tailor's chalk or something similar. And then on the reverse side, because this material is nice and thin and that is somewhat intentional, I can just see through it to draw it on there. And you can do that both on the curved lines, although it can take a little bit more fussing, and you can do the same thing on the darts. Then, with all of our seam lines transferred, we're going to take them over and stitch them together on the new seam lines. Once we've re-stitched it all back together, we put it back on our dress form or back on ourselves and test the fit. And I will say I'm much happier with how this fits. There's a lot less excess material on it. So this is a pretty good base for us to start with. Once you're happy with all of the fitting that you've done, the last step is to actually convert this into your new pattern. So we're going to take it off the dress form again, and we're going to lay it out on our table. And then what we do is we're actually going to convert this into our new pattern. So I lay the whole thing out, and then I cut off all of the seams. Actually, you only have to do it for half the garment. here we have our front pieces and our back pieces, and these can become our new pattern pieces. You might notice a few places, like right in here where this line is not a nice curve. So we're gonna do a little bit of trimming just to smooth out some of these curves, which will help us with those puckers we were getting right around the boobs. The thing to remember when you do sew these back together and use them as your new pattern pieces, they do not have a seam allowance. So remember to add that on when you are cutting them out. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you found it helpful. If you have questions, obviously leave those in the comments below. If there's anything else you want to learn about cosplay, let me know so I can make more videos. You can also subscribe to this channel so you get those sweet alerts for when I have a new video out, or check me out live on twitch.tv/randomtuesday, where I'm always happy to answer cosplay questions. And as always, thank you to each and every one of my patrons over on Patreon who made this video a reality. If you're able to, any support over there is greatly appreciated. Plus, you get access to some really cool, sweet rewards, like copies of all of my PDF patterns, cosplay wallpapers and image sets, and sneak peeks of what I'm working on next. Thank you so much for watching.